Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, right. So everyone, welcome to the workshop. Just a second. I hope anyone doesn't have a problem with Hindi. And दिनेश एक बार ये चेक कर लो कि लॉबी क्यों आ रहा है मुझे, मतलब कौन कौन लॉबी में वेट कर रहे हैं.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So yeah, today I would be discussing about neural networks and further convolutional neural networks. And like I'm trying to give you a like intuition of how these neural networks work more than the mathematical aspects of it. Like we would share the resources for the mathematical aspects too, but like you try to give you a feel of how like everything is working. Like there isn't some sort of magic going around. So yeah, let's start with neural networks. So it's basically a method of computing based on the interaction of multiple connected processing elements. So what it means is like I'm just going to show it with an image here. Like the multiple connected processing elements are these neurons. These neurons, the interconnection between them and the data they are like the data they are processing and transmitting to other neurons. These are basically this interaction is helping to like compute maybe the classification or anything that we require. So let's start with why do we need neural networks, right? So we have already learned about linear regression, logistic regression. So why yet another learning algorithm? So first of all, the main reason for artificial, like anywhere I refer to neural networks, it's just about artificial neural networks. Okay. So first of all, uh, let's talk about features, right? Suppose we want to distinguish between a cat and a dog, and you are told to like create a set of features. So there would be like multiple features, right? Maybe the shape of the ears, the nose, the shape of the face, how tall the creature is, sort of that. And you can't just go on creating features on your own. And let's see this example. Suppose you have to create a model to train if it's a car or not. And I'm just taking a small grayscale image, 50 cross 50 image of 2500 pixels. So each pixel will have an intensity of 0 to 255. So as you would have seen in the previous workshop for logistic regression, like for non-linear decision boundaries, you can't just work with some the features like x1, x2, x3. You need to have quadratic features, maybe cubic features of the sort. So just considering the quadratic features for finding this, like just xi cross xj, all the possibilities, you can find that this simply creates 3 million features. And try putting that in a logistic regression gradient descent. That's actually not a correct way to like that's computationally very expensive and like not really uh, accurate. You can try reducing the features to maybe just taking the linear ones x1, x2, x3. That would underfit. If you take too many like xi, xj, or maybe cubic, it would just create, as you can see, many features. So that's really not a great way to do. So that's why people have come with neural networks. Okay, so neural networks is like analogous to the ones we have inside our brains. So actually, the inspiration has been taken from that only. As you can see, like in neurons, how the synapse and the dendrites, like each synapse is connected to various dendrites. Each dendrites, these neurons pass information to other neurons and so on. That's a vast interconnection of neurons, and that's what helps in relaying information. Similarly is the case in artificial neurons, right? So for artificial neurons, you can see just it's nothing but fundamentally it's just something that holds a number, right? And it's just a I can see a circle that just holds a number, and this number in our case would be a number between 0 to 1. That would be defining the probability of something. So basically, a neuron would be anything that holds a number, and like we would be storing a probability of some stuff. Right? We will discuss about that later. So as you can see, the inputs here, this are like the synapse, and this the output are given. These can be the dendrites. These can be passed to other neurons too, and yeah. So these can be passed to other neurons too, and this is how they are connected. So this is the analogy between a biological and an artificial neuron. So as I said, a single neuron, I would be discussing about a single neuron first, like I would first be clearing the fundamentals and then we would be working on the network. So just on the neurons, what a neuron does. Okay, so all it does is take these inputs, right? I showed you the inputs here, the input 1 and 2. All it does is take these inputs and it calculate some value, and what that value is, like I have like this has been described here in some process. Let's say it receives n inputs, right? All n inputs it receives. Each input is multiplied their weight. Now, what is weight? Each input, you can see each connection has a weight assigned to it, and here is a summation, and so all it is, each input is multiplied to its corresponding weight, and they are summed together. So the first step is the summing process. Multiplies each input by its weight, and they are summed. Now we apply the activation function to the sum of the results. The sum that we get, we apply an activation function to it. Like in the previous workshop, you would have been told about activation function. Yet I will like review it once more, the ones we need. And that's all. Takes the input. Each input is multiplied by its weight, added, applied an activation function, and that's all the neuron stores. Okay. So moving on. So here, like the activation function, which activation function we would be using. So for our use, like I'm showing you the sigmoid function. Why we are using sigmoid? There are other functions like ReLU and others too. I'm just showing you one, the sigmoid function, like it would be really appropriate for our use here. So main reason we are using it because you can see it just gives a value between 0 and 1, right? And hence it's great for us since we need to each neuron to store the probability of something. So probability can be between 0 and 1, right? So you can see this is the perfect choice for an activation function here. So because summing up the whole process, what the neuron does here is it takes the input. So the inputs are x1, x2, xm. This one here is just a bias unit. I will like it's not necessary to explain. I will just give you a bit of a basic explanation after this is covered. Okay, so this is a bias unit. Okay, and these are the inputs x1, x2, xm. Each connection has a weight assigned to it, theta 1, theta 2, theta m, and the bias unit has a theta naught weight. Okay, so these are first summed. How these are summed, like it is shown here in the right side, it is in matrix format. So I've like broken it down in simpler format down here. So it can be seen that this sum here is theta naught plus theta 1 x1, theta 2 x2 plus theta m xm. This is all the sum is. Now, as I said, we need to apply the activation function. Activation function, like I'm calling it g of z. So the activation function is 1 by 1 plus e to the power minus z. This is the sigmoid activation function. So the sum we are getting, we would be applying that function to it. And what that output gives is the output that is stored in the neuron. Okay. So here, like suppose if this value comes out to be -8, you can see that for -8, the activation function would give 0. For +10, it would give 1. So that's how the output of a neuron would be calculated. Okay. So yeah, this is all the neurons. And this probability, why we're actually storing the probabilities, right? That's a question. Like suppose I showed you in the first slide, prediction between cat or a dog. Just a second, waiting for the slide to load, I think. Yeah. So like for this example, you can see like if it's distinguishing between a cat and a dog, the output you can see there are like two neurons. So these two neurons will actually hold the probability of whether it's a cat or a dog. Okay, so each output, it will have a, like this neuron would hold the probability of it's a cat or it's a dog, something like that. Okay, in the output, it would have the probability corresponding. So what neurons store is like there is 0.9% or like 0.9 probability that it's a dog, not a cat, sort of that. So that's why each neuron is like storing a probability, and that probability is actually being calculated based on the inputs and passed on to the other neurons. So let me give you an example of how these neurons are actually working, right? So like I've told you the basic, but it will become more clear if I just show you an example here. So I will try to like implement a simple logic and logic using neurons. So what and does, all of you know, is like if 1 and 1, it gives 1, and for all other inputs, it will give 0, as in the truth table. So we will try to implement and logic using just a single neuron. So let's give inputs x1 and x2. These would be the inputs of and. Okay, sorry, I forgot about the bias unit. Like just give you an intuition of why the bias unit is being used. So like bias unit is being used. Suppose if you have a single input theta1 and x1. So the output would be just theta1 and x1, and if you plot it, it would just be a linear graph, right? Of the form y equals to mx. But suppose you need something like y equals to mx plus c. So for that, the bias unit comes into play. As you can see, it sort of just adds to the whole summation. Similarly, so here I just created these weights have been assigned like not have been calculated any fixed. It is just to show like something that works. So don't worry about these specific amount of the weights that have been used. So here let me assign the first as to plus 20, and the bias is given the weight of minus 30. Okay. So as I said, first we would sum the all the inputs multiplied by their weight. So minus 30 plus 20 times x1 plus 20 times x2. Right, and we would pass it through the activation function. So now the activation function, now let's see for the inputs x1 and x2, what all output it gives. So for 0 and 0, you can see this term and this term would cancel out. The 20x1 and 20x2 would cancel out. Only minus 30 would remain. So g of minus 30, as you can see in the activation function, minus 30, the value is 0, right? So it's going as expected, the AND logic. Let's try for 0 and 1. So it will be minus 30 plus 20, right? It's minus 10. Similarly, it would give 0. For 1 and 0, it would give 20 minus 30, again minus 10. As you can see in the graph, for like as soon as like for like minus 4 plus 4, it just rapidly goes to 0 only. And now for considering the 1 and 1, the different case. So if you see that 20 plus 20 would be 40 minus 30, 10. So g of 10, you can see it gives 1. So you can see this is exactly the truth table of an AND logic. So this is how a simple neuron can be used. Just using weights, a simple neuron can be used to calculate a logic. Okay, so now we'll try to see about how these are connected. So like I said, a single neuron, the fundamental function of a neuron has been like I've told you about this fundamental function of a neuron. Take input, calculate the corresponding output, and like pass it to the other ones. So this is how the layers are created. Okay, so first is the input layer, and the connections are made, and each neuron would be calculating the output based on its previous inputs and passing out to the other neurons based on the connection. Okay, and in each step you can see it's the same summation xi wi, and you pass it through the activation function f for like g. So let's see a example of a multi-layer neuron. Okay, multi-layer neural network. So I told you about X1 and X2. I told you using how to implement it using one neuron. Similarly, you can implement of not X1 and not X2, X1 or X2. So let's try X1, X nor X2. So if you break down X1, X nor X2, it is X1 and X2 odd with not X1 and X2, not X2. So I have these individual steps defined here. X1 and X2 I have in the red. The not X1, not X2 is in the blue, and this OR function in the middle is in green, right? So let's try to implement first the AND function. This in the red, minus 30, minus 20, minus 20, as you can see here. This gives first neuron, A1. And let's try the one with not X1 and not X2. This would go 10, minus 20, minus 20. Now we have got these two values in the brackets. Those are stored in A1 and A2, and we need to OR them. So that's where the second layer comes into picture, the OR for creating the OR. So that's how you can see X1, XNOR, X2 is implemented using just two layer of neurons. You can see the truth table here. You can calculate it on yourself. The truth table is exactly the same as the XNOR. So that's how, like, just to give an recap of everything that I have told. So we talked about the individual feature of neuron. It just stores a number between 0 and 1 and it's calculated based on the inputs. The inputs are summed, weighted sum, and passed through an activation function. And based on that, a number between 0 and 1 comes into the neuron. that is passed into other neurons, and this is how a whole network is created. And based on that, the output layer would have the probabilities of each. Suppose these are probabilities of like numbers. If I am, let me just show you the network here. Okay, so suppose I have here, I have to a network which has to define whether it's a circle, square, or a triangle, right? So here you can see the output layer consists of the final three decisions that can be made. And each neuron here would store the probability that it's the specified figure. So what suppose if this figure is fed into the network, so what you would want is that this neuron would fire up showing a probability more than 0.9, something like that. So the maximum probability, whichever neuron these three have, that would be the shape that the model is predicting. So we have seen, actually, I have shown you here the weights. I have assigned them myself, right? These aren't assigned by the computer. There isn't any learning. I just try to show you how like neurons and the neural networks work. So this is not possible in the higher, like if there are many input features, you can't just, here it was a bit intuitive that you can define, you know how the outputs are, they are just four sets of output, and you can define these weights yourself. So we want the computer to learn to adjust these weights like itself. So that's what is like neural networks learning part. Okay, so the connection is made, these models, this structure is made, there are several model architectures there. These models are made like you can increase, like if you increase the layers, the computational power would required would be more. If you reduce the accuracy would be less. So like proper architectures I've made, you don't need to worry about that. I would be telling about like giving a brief view of how the neural network learning is done. Okay, I would give you the intuition, and it's done using the back propagation algorithm. Okay, the mathematics behind it I will share you in the as a resource, a YouTube video or something, so that you can follow it there easily, not to confuse you right now. So I will tell you how basically a back propagation algorithm works. Okay, so first of all, every connection there, you don't know what weight it will, so you just assign a random weight to it. Okay, based on that, each neuron is calculated, the every, as you showed, for each neuron you can calculate what it will store based on the inputs and the weights of the connections. You can see all these would calculate a value, these would pass to the other next layer, these would pass. So as you can see, this is a forward propagation. Calculating from here, it would pass on here, and in the output layer you would have the final probabilities. Suppose the final probabilities come out to be 0.5, 0.4, 0.1, right? This sums up to be 1. Okay, this would obviously sum up to 1 because these are all the like options available. So here's a circle, and I'm having a probability of 0.5 for square, and for circle it's 0.4, 0.1. Now there's a problem, right? Now we need to make the computer learn to adjust these weights such that every time a circle comes, this neuron is actually fired up. This neuron shows a value 1. So the actual output I have written here, what the actual output should be. For this figure, the actual output should be 1, and for others, it should be 0. So this is like the essence of supervised learning, right? You tell the computer that actually whatever it's calculating is not correctly, like 100% correct. So it should be 1, others should be 0. Based on that, errors would be calculated. And as you saw in logistic regression, you calculate the cost function, you apply gradient descent to it, and based on that, you tune the parameters to adjust to the, like to predict the outputs correctly. Same happens here. Just the thing is, like here, the cost functions grow a bit bigger and the calculations get a bit more expensive. As you can see, there are multiple neurons involved. Changing a single weight can change a lot of stuff. So based on the error, we calculate the derivative of the cost function with respect to each weight, like how much effect each connection is like creating, each connection is weighing to the output. So based on that cost function, these weights are first modified. Now, as I showed, first the error is calculated. Based on the errors and the weights, these weights are changed. Now this would be recalculated. Now these would pass back the errors here and recalculate these weights. These would pass back the errors and recalculate these weights. Then again, this process as can be seen as back propagation. Okay. Now again, the process would repeat. it would again calculate and again see if circle is being predicted as 1 or not. If it's not being predicted, it would again follow the back propagation algorithm, try to adjust the weights, this like tune all the parameters right here until everything becomes perfect. And for all data sets, you are able to get the desired output. That's the essence of backpropagation algorithm. You forward all the computations. You like first to the forward propagation based on the weights. You calculate each neuron's value and you propagate it to the end. In the end, you match it to the actual output and you find the error. Based on the error, you propagate the error backwards. You propagate it, and on the way, you try to rectify each weight, and then you continue the process. And as you can see, this intensive connection here, like obviously takes a lot of computation time. So you can see like models take some time to train, like it can take minutes to even days to months, right? So that's it. Like that's all about like the learning of neural networks. So just a quick recap, this would be the end of the slide. So just a quick recap, we talked about neurons, a single neurons, each stores a particular value. The value is mostly 0 to 1, like I've shown you, it's the probability that it's storing, and you would be now like comfortable with why it's storing the probability of what the probability it is. How each neuron works, it takes input, calculates the sum, calculates the puts it into the activation function, and you have the output right there. That output, like I told you why we are using sigmoid function, that output is passed to other neurons, and those neurons are connected, like the same process goes on. I showed you how some like neurons, like single layer or multi-layer neural networks I have shown, how those can be, the weights can be adjusted so that a neural network can be formed to implement a logic. In similar way, logics are implemented for like distinguishing between images. Same kind of stuff is done. It's just that the features are a lot more. It's like, as you can see here, it's 784 here is because 28 cross 28, each pixel is fed into it. So the features are more, there are a lot of more interconnections, and hence the computer is given the learning process. First, the weights, based on the weights, there's the forward propagation. We compare it to the actual output based on the error. We try to adjust all the parameters, and finally, we get the adjusted weights, and the model is ready to work on any output, sorry, input. So yeah, that's all about neural networks. Now Rohan would be continuing the rest of the workshop. We're talking about convolutional neural networks and stuff, improvements to these. And yeah, so this would be like the last like workshop for Mosaic, plus the combined workshop of Mosaic and Cassandra. And from the next one, would also be diverging into the separate niches. So Mosaic would be talking about the computer vision, and we were talking about the data science. Cassandra would be talking about the data science related topics. Right. So yeah, that's it. Rohan, I'm gonna stop. You can just start. And all these slides I would share you at the end, and all the mathematical aspects of it would be shared too. The backpropagation, especially, like it's not really important. You don't need the exact mathematical approach to create that. Yet, if you want, you are interested, you can go through those resources. Hopefully, you have got a feel of how the neural networks and stuff are working. And yeah, let me just check the comments if there are. Yeah, if there are any doubts, you can ask. So there's just doubt about the bias. Yeah, so do you need it to be cleared once more, the bias part? So yeah, it's not actually really important. So as I told you, you can see it through an example here, right? So you can see how this bias part is going into a play. And I told you about a simple analogy. So if there was a single neuron, single input x1, and you calculated the output of it, you would just get theta 1 x1. That would just be a line, just a straight line passing through origin. And you don't need always like that. If you need something like y equals to mx plus b, you need a bias to that. Okay, and bias term is kind of self-explanatory, right? You are actually trying to alter the output just a bit, as you can see here. Like, okay. And if there are any other doubts, you can ask in the chat. Otherwise, like I will stop presenting, and Rohan will continue the rest of the workshop. Okay, Rohan, you're there?
Yeah, I'm there. I'm there.
Yeah, okay, sure. Thank you.
So any more doubts anyone has? So if there are no doubts, I'll be proceeding with convolutional neural networks. Before I start that part, I just wanted to add that I hope whatever was taught in the last two workshops, you people have seen the videos and also run the code. So if you have not done so, please do it soon. And of course, you can reach out to us anytime you have any questions. And also, one more thing is that, just a minute. So I hope you're able to see the screen. Is it visible? Hello?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So I like this. There's this course by Andrew Ng on Coursera. So it is a very, it goes into the depth of the mathematics that is involved in all the in machine learning. So please try to see this course, see the relevant things in the course. It has many things. So go through the relevant parts of it whenever you get time. So that will definitely deepen your understanding. And it's also a course which is very popular, and I recommend everyone to go through it. So moving on. So convolutional neural networks are just a special kind of neural networks which are adapted to the task of classifying images primarily. So just a minute. Hello, is it visible in full screen now? Hello?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay. So the left hand side is the general artificial neural network which Ronit explained.
Rohan,
So
your Windows Explorer is showing.
Okay. Now?
No. You will have to represent. Stop the screen sharing.
Yeah. It's all right now, right?
It's clear, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the left hand side is the convolutional neural network, which the artificial neural. Can you please mute your? Okay. So the left hand side is the artificial neural network which Ronit discussed. And the convolutional neural network is a slight modification wherein it takes the input image, which is the red part, and it transforms it into 3D volumes of various sizes. That's what it's doing on a very high level. So let's see how it is doing that and why it does that. So the most basic thing is the convolution layer. Convolution layer is just it involves weights and biases itself, which you have already seen, but it's in a different fashion. So here what happens is the weights are arranged in the form of a two-dimensional matrix. So this you see these red color values, right? They form a matrix, and they are the weights. and this matrix is called a kernel. So what the kernel does is it slides over the image in this as you can see here, and what it does is it multiplies each pixel value with its weight. So for example, in this case, I would get the output value as 1 into 1 plus 0 plus 1, etc., etc. It becomes 4. So this is this part of the image, top left. And the filter slides over every part of the image one by one, and we end up with this 3x3 image, which is called a feature map. So that is how convolution works. So this was a two-dimensional image with just ones and zeros, or black and white. So but when you have a three-dimensional image, things are a little different. There you will just have a kernel or a filter which is three-dimensional. So here it is a cube, and it moves around the image in a similar fashion. So first it would finish this row. It would move horizontally, then it would shift vertically downwards, then move horizontally again, then shift vertically downwards once again. So it follows this arrow mark, and it stops once it has reached the bottom right corner of the image. So what is happening is at every point it is computing a single result. It is computing a single single result output value. So in this case, it computed 4 from these 9 elements. So even in a three-dimensional image, a filter at one place will give me just one value. So when after it moves over the entire three-dimensional image, I would end up with a 2D set of values, or a matrix, which is my feature map. So that is just for one filter. So if I take n filters, suppose, and I perform the same process wherein it slides over the entire image, then I would get n different feature maps, which if I stack one over the other, I would get a 3D volume, of different feature maps. So let's look at it in a different perspective. So here I have the image as before. This is the small box is the filter. This box then computes this first value over here, and then when I change the filter, it will compute a different value for the same position, which is the second one here. So if I use 5 filters, I will get 5 different output values at the same position in the image. So if when I move the filter, all the 5 filters over the various positions, I would end up with a 3D volume which is depicted like a cube here. So what you should understand here is that this is the same process of weights being applied to features and a bias being added to it, which I've seen before. So just the difference is that before we were doing a dot product of two vectors, but now it is just a matrix product of two 2D matrices. So this is so after we perform the summation over the weights and like the multiplication of the weights and the input features and add the bias, we then pass it to the activation function. So that function is it can be ReLU or sigmoid or various other things, and that is the output. That's how the output is computed. So I hope you are clear with what is the modification in convolutional layers. So here we'll go into a bit more depth into the parameters that are involved. So suppose I have a 7x7 image and I have a 3x3 filter. So what I do is there's a parameter called stride. Stride is nothing but how much the filter, by how many columns the filter will shift after one convolution operation. So if I suppose have make it it's 2 in this case, right? So it would first start out over here, then it would shift by 2 spots and go over here, and then it would shift from here to here, and then this part it would operate on this part. After that it would shift by 2 rows, come here, and then act on this part. So like this, so for every part I'm getting a different output. So I'll get 9 values. Sorry, this is my filter. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll get 9 values in this fashion. So like what you see here is that initially I had a 7x7 feature map, but now it has been reduced to just 3x3. So then if I perform another convolution operation on this, that would reduce it even further to maybe 2x2 or something like that. If I don't want that to happen, I have a way to prevent that, and that is called image padding. So what I do in image padding is essentially I just make my image bigger by just adding zeros at the boundary of the image. So I can add any thickness of padding that I want. So here I've just added 1 layer. Now the filter would start from this corner, whereas before it was starting from this corner, and and consequently it would go through more positions than before, and the resulting output would also be bigger. The resulting output feature map would also be bigger in this case. So maybe okay, we'll look at the formula for calculating the output size. It'll become clear there. So the formula is looks something like this. So my n cross n is the dimension of the input feature map. F cross f is the size of the filter. Here it is 3x3. Stride is stride I just discussed. And so these are the 3, and padding is represented by P. So how many layers of padding I added around my input feature map is P. So in this case, if I plug all the values into this formula, 7 plus 2 into 0 minus 3 by 2 plus 1, that gives me 3 as the output, which is the size of the output feature map. So I'll just ask one quick question to everyone. So if you want the output feature map to be 7x7, how many layers of padding should I add to my input feature map?
Four.
Yeah, right. Good. So you just have to look in the formula where if you equate P to 4, this formula will just output 7, which is equal to our initial feature map's dimensions. So that is the way how you preserve the size of the feature map as you proceed through the different convolutions. So next is next we will talk about why this convolution concept came into picture in the first place. Like, why can we not, so suppose I want to this is my input image, 32 cross 32 cross 3. So 3 is just RGB, all the 3 channels. So this is my input image. Let's say it's an image of a cat. I can just use a traditional artificial neural network with fully connected layers. I can just take all of these values and make them into a one-dimensional vector, input it to this network, and then this is a hidden layer with 4,000 something neurons. And then let's say that I have like if it's a cat versus dog classifier, I'll have 2 output neurons, and these will output the probabilities that it's a cat or a dog. So why is this approach not efficient? Because the reason is that if you compute the number of weights and biases you will need, so if I just take 2 layers, just two, this is the input, and this is the first hidden layer. If I just take these 2 layers, then I'll find that if I multiply them, this would be the number of weights I need. Plus, I'm also adding a bias term, so per each neuron, so plus 4,000. This would give me a result of around 14 million. So, and that's a lot of parameters to train, which would need a lot of, which would take a lot of time, and it would also need a lot of memory to optimize the weights with the gradients, etc., to perform all the calculations. So it happens to be quite inefficient. And that is the case with only a 32 cross 32 image. So if I have a bigger image, say 500 cross 500, it would blow up into like maybe billions of parameters. So in the convolution approach which we just learned, if we have say a 5 cross 5 filter, so a 5 cross 5 filter, and which would have 25 weights, right? 5 cross 5, and so it's a 2D filter in this case, not a 3D filter, and I have 6 filters like that. Then I would just end up with 156 parameters. So if you compare the two of them, you see that there's a lot of reduction in the number of parameters required, which would speed up the computation by a lot, and it would also reduce the time taken to perform these computations. The second thing is that this will also enable something called parameter sharing. So essentially, what parameter sharing is that my filter, I just have one filter in here, and that single filter is acting on different parts of my input feature map. So it's not like every pixel. It's not like every number in the input feature map has its own weight. So this same set of 9 weights is acting over the entire thing and producing the output feature map. A lot of parameter sharing is happening here, which is indirectly why the number of parameters decreased from 14 million in the previous case. So parameter sharing is one aspect, and this this particular example, this filter is something called an edge detector filter. So what it will do is, my image here is a binary image where 10s are white pixels and zeros are black pixels. Actually, instead of calling it an image, it's better to call a feature map, because at any given point of the neural network, you are generally dealing with feature maps itself. So in this feature map, so when I find out the output feature map, I find that in the center there are 30s and other places it's 0. So what that means is that it has just detected an edge. So this is the white part and black part, right? So there's an edge separating them. So this kind of filter, if I use, wherever there's an edge, I find that the output values are high. So this is a vertical edge detector. In the same way, if you want a horizontal edge detector, you would have a similar one wherein you would have something like ones here, minus ones here, and zeros in the center. So this would be able to detect your horizontal edges. So this edge detection is what enables CNNs to uh, actually see the image and identify the edges in them. So that is the starting. Here you can see a visual representation of the filters. So you can see that in the starting so these kind of filters are just filters that are trying to detect edges at various angles. So this is trying to detect a horizontal edge. This one, these are trying to detect edges at some angle, and these are trying to just detect some color gradients. So in the beginning, you see that the filters are very basic looking, like very basic general tasks like edge detection they're performing. But as you proceed through the through the convolutional network, like these are at later convolution layers. It's a like typically we would have 3 to 4 convolutional layers in an average convolutional network. So this you can say that this is for the first layer, this is for second and third. So here you can see that more advanced filters are being developed to detect like very specific shapes. Like this looks like an eye sort of. So this is trying to look for eyes in the image to detect faces for maybe. So and there are and every filter would be trying to detect its own different thing. And as you go further, you would find that it gets more and more complex with more complex shapes, and the filters are trying to detect even more complex features in the image. So that was about convolutional layer. Then then we come to the pooling layer. Pooling layer is essentially used to decrease the size of my feature map. So if I have my feature 3D volume of the feature maps in this dimension 224 cross 224 cross 64, I can just use pooling to reduce the width and height by half. But the depth will still remain 64. So that is what will happen. So why we are doing it is we are trying to preserve the essential features in the feature map while also eliminating the unnecessary things like noise, for example. And by doing this, by reducing the dimensions of my feature map, what happens is that I need lesser like the number of calculations will decrease. So the time taken to train your network will also decrease. So this is one way of reducing the size of the feature map. So other way is just to use a bigger stride in the formula which I showed you earlier. So if you increase the stride here, since it's in the denominator, it would be inversely proportional to the output size, and therefore you would get a smaller output size. That is another approach you could take if you want to decrease the size of the feature maps. So coming back to pooling, there are two different types of pooling layers. Major ones. There are others too, but these two are the most commonly used. In max pooling, what we do is we divide the input feature map into so here it's 2 cross 2 boxes, and in each box we find out what is the maximum value. So 20 is the maximum among these four. So 20 is selected. So 30 is maximum among these four, 30 is selected. And similarly here also, that is max pooling. Simple as that. In average pooling, it's what the name suggests. Just take the average of all of these four values and put it here. Similarly for the other three. So here also, here the previous concept of filter size and input size is still, like the formula which I showed you will still hold here. So here the filter size would just be 2 cross 2, and the input feature map size would be 4 cross 4. If you go back to this formula and put those numbers in, you would get the output as output feature map dimensions as 2 cross 2 itself. You can try that. Then it's the fact is that pooling layers do not have any learnable parameters like weights or biases. So that is obvious because we are just computing the average or the maximum value. So there's no need for multiplying any weights or adding any biases there. So they don't exist here, and so they don't change when you are training the model. They just find the maximum value or the average value. And this is just why they are used. So they eliminate noise and they reduce the dimension. So I already discussed about that. So till now we saw two kinds of layers: convolutional layers and pooling layers. So till now our neural network looks like this. So we have the input image, we have a convolutional layer, we have a pooling layer after that. And one more thing is that after performing a... Hello?
पिछली बार तो नहीं पढ़ा था पिछले मजाक में.
Hello? Sorry?
नहीं पढ़ा था.
Hello? Any question?
Just chat in the chat. Just type it in the chat box. Your voice is not.
Okay, I'll... Okay, in the meantime, I'll just I'll come back to the chat soon after this. So so till now we just saw two types of layers. So convolutional layer, then an activation function after that, then a pooling layer to reduce the size of the 3D volume. Then again we repeat these two combination of layers again and again in our neural network, and we can do this any number of times we desire. So the more you do it, the deeper your network becomes and the more parameters it has. So okay, so then though now that brings us to the flatten layer. So this flatten layer is just takes this output volume which I got here, and it just stretches it out in the form of a 1D vector. So just 14 cross 14 cross 3. That will if you so just that those are just flattened out into a 1D vector. The flatten layer, that's all it does. Then that flattened vector is just fed into a fully connected layer. So this is where the classification happens. So this is, you can think of this part as just a mini neural network which has one hidden layer and one output layer and the output layer. So what is happening here is that we have 20 neurons in the hidden layer, and we are using ReLU activation here, and so this is all of these will be connected to every single neuron. So all of these. So everything, it's a fully connected layer, and similarly here as well. So what my output nodes will output initially would be a vector of 5 values here. So I just take this vector and I take the individual values and just take the exponential of that. So for example, if I want, so this is for computing the probabilities. So if I, for example, so for 1.3, if I want to compute the probability, it would just be e power 1.3 divided by e power 1.3 plus e power 5.1 plus e power 2.2, etc. So that would be my probability. So when I do that, that gives me the probabilities. And this activation function is just called softmax activation function. Now, with this much knowledge, we have input one image and we have got the probabilities of each classes. So that is that much. That was our goal itself. So to find out the probabilities of each class. So that completes our neural network, convolutional neural network architecture, like all the various parts of it. So now my CNN would look something like this. This is the complete picture. Now we saw this part earlier where we are trying to extract the features and we are trying to condense them by decreasing the size through pooling and stuff. Now we just have fully connected layers here which do the high level decisions based on these features. Like they just take the inputs of these features and they use the softmax activation to calculate the probabilities of the various classes. So that's what the convolutional neural network picture looks like. And just one more thing is that in the previous examples, I had just when Ronit explained the artificial neural network, there was just one output node with sigmoid activation function. But here that's not the case. Here I have 5 output nodes, and each of them is outputting a probability corresponding to that class. So I need a different kind of labeling here. I cannot just label them as 0 for class 1 and 0 for class 0 and 1 for class 1. So it's not, because it's not a binary case here, I need a different kind of label. So what I do is something called one hot encoding, wherein for every single class, I have a 3-dimensional length 3 vector. Like it's a 1D vector with 3 elements. So for a cat, this is class 0 in my example. This is class 0, this is class 1, this is class 2. So for class 0, the 0th element in the array or the vector would be a 1. So similarly here also, in the second class, the second element would be a 1. And the reason we do this is that for applying for comparing the output with these probabilities, the output itself is a vector, and I cannot compare a vector with I have to compare a vector with a vector itself, right? So that's why I turn my labels into vectors in this form. So then that's it for one hot encoding. Now here I've shown a picture of AlexNet, which is a popular convolutional neural network, and here I've shown the details, like which layer has how many kernels, which layer and what is the stride, etc. So and this is just the formula which we saw earlier, for computing the output shape. And so you can see that it's just transforming the volume into various dimensions, and you have just like we saw, we have convolution first, then max pooling, followed by convolution again, then max pooling, etc. And then in the end we have we have a fully connected, we have two hidden layers of fully connected networks. We have two fully connected hidden layers of size 4096, and then we have a softmax activation with 1000 classes in this example. So this is, you can go through it to clarify, I mean, to get a clearer picture of the entire thing, like get a high level look at whatever is going on. Then transfer learning is something that you should know about. So we till now we saw like the neural networks and all, we initialize we initialize it by ourselves, right? Like we decided how many convolutional layers should be there and how many max pooling layers should be there, like following them, etc. But generally, we don't, not generally, in some applications, we do not need to build our network from scratch. We can just use networks, which are network architectures, which are already available from libraries. So, and you can also use the weights which the trained weight. So it's like you are just getting a trained model ready to use. So what you do is that, so for example, AlexNet is, you can get a trained AlexNet model, and you can do one thing. You can freeze the earlier layers, and you can unfreeze the later layer. So, and then train it. What will happen then is that the frozen layers will not be updated. Their parameters will not be updated. Only the unfrozen layers would have their parameters changed. And this would improve, like increase the time, decrease the time it would take for you to reach a particular accuracy. This is because these neural networks, for example, AlexNet, it has been trained on 1.2 million images from a data set called ImageNet, and which has 1000 different classes. So it's a very diverse data set with a lot of different categories of images. So it has seen a lot of images and learned very appropriate filters to detect edges, etc. in on those images. So like we saw that the earlier layers of the convolutional neural networks, the filters just learn to detect edges and colors, etc. So that basic functionality is needed everywhere. Like even if you're trying to, for example, predict digits, like handwritten digits, if it's a 0 or a 1, or if you're trying to classify a image into a cat or a dog, so edge detection is needed in both places. So we can just make use of the filters which AlexNet, the pre-trained filters which AlexNet has, and the later layers which would just learn the features which we need, like to detect if a cat, if like for if you're detecting a cat, you would need to detect whiskers, etc. So it would learn those features which are required for our data set. The earlier layers don't learn that. So this is about transfer learning. And data augmentation is a important thing which is done almost every time. So our data, it's actually, sometimes data sets might not be available to us in a large amount of quantity, in which case we can produce our own data from data samples from the data that's already existing. So for example, if I have a cat dog classifier, I want to train a cat dog classifier, I can just take an image of a cat and flip it around like this. That would still be a cat, but it's a different sample point altogether. It has like this, it's not the same image. So this will improve the accuracy, because the more data you train your model on, the better the models become. That is the general idea here. so there are a lot of methods of data augmentation. This is just one basic method, and you have to get a little creative about what kind of method you can use. So, for example, you cannot use flipping in number recognizer, like, or handwritten digit recognizer, because if you flip around a 6, it's no more a 6. So yeah, you can't do it everywhere. Then overfitting versus underfitting. Overfitting is something undesirable, which actually both of them are undesirable. Overfitting happens when the model only learns to predict correctly the examples it has been trained on. So suppose in my cat dog classifier, I have only in my in my training data set, I have only images of white cats. Then if I show it a picture of a black cat, it would not be able to tell if it's a cat, because it has never seen it before. It has not been trained on it. So in that case, you would say that it has been overfit to only white cats. So this to avoid this, you have to make your data set more varied. Like, it should have more variety, or like more, yeah, variety. It should have more variety. And the way to recognize this is that your training accuracy would be high, because it knows it can correctly predict whatever it has been trained on. But testing would be low, because it cannot generalize to examples which it has not seen before. So that is how you identify whether overfitting is happening. On the other hand, underfitting happens when the model is not even able to learn the samples which you are trying to train it on. So yeah, so whatever samples you have trained on or shown it before, even those, if the model is predicting incorrectly, then that is underfitting. In this case, both my training and testing accuracies would be low. So in that case, that is called underfitting. So that brings us to the end of the theory part of the workshop. I would show the code after this. So if you have any doubts regarding this theory, you can ask me, or you can ask me now. Like, any questions regarding convolutional neural networks or the basic neural networks? Anything? Or you can ask me anything related to the previous workshops as well.
Here, what is the cost function that we use for multi-classification, where we have multiple classes?
Yeah, there you use categorical cross entropy, which is a log-based function itself. So it is quite similar to the logistic regression loss function. So it just has log. It involves log, so you can just look it up. It's like not very important, but you can look it up. So any more questions? Okay, then I'll show you the code of the related code of convolutional networks. So just give it a minute. Okay, so so I have a zip file here which has images of cats and dogs. And I mean this will take time to do, but so you can do it later. But I'll just tell you what will happen. So this command will just unzip this zip file to my Colab directory. And you will in this folder you will just get one folder which has two subfolders called cat and dog. So inside cat there'll be images of cats, and inside dogs there'll be images of dogs. So you need that kind of setup before you can proceed with training your neural network. So okay, let me. Yeah, I'll let it happen. I'll just explain, and in the meantime, I'll be explaining what each line means. So here I just import all the elements which I need for my code. Then you'll get to know what each element is when I explain in the following explanation. So I just unzipped it now, and you can see that it has unzipped it into two folders inside the train folder. Now I specify train path, which is just the path of this folder train. Then I have something called image data generator. That what that does is it just rescales my image. Rescale in a sense, it just normalizes all the pixel values by dividing them by 255. So my input image now would just have pixels in the range from 0 to 1, because 255 is the maximum value. And I talked about data augmentation, right? Flipping the image. So this is the parameter which allows you to do that. Where if you set it to true, some training images are just randomly flipped along they're flipped along horizontal axis. They're flipped horizontally, which means the exact transformation which you saw with the cat image. So then we use data flow from directory function, wherein directory is just we equate it to the path of this train folder. Target size is my image size, image dimensions or resolution. And batch size is just how many images I want in one batch. So batches, we don't train our model with all the images at once. Like we divide our training data into batches, our training images into batches. So here it would be 55 images in one batch, and then we train our model using just one batch. We update the parameters, go to the next batch, update the parameters after that, then next batch, so on and so forth. So the reason for this is that I cannot hold all my memory, hold all the images in memory at the same time, because it would be more than, it would be in gigabytes, like all the images, if you try to store them in memory in RAM, and that would make my runtime would not be able to support so much memory. So we split them into batches and do it accordingly. So 55 images is easy to store in memory. Then this gives me the I have 25,000 images belonging to two classes. So that is 12,500 per each class. Then this is just for your visualization, wherein I use the next function to get an array called sample. And this sample is a complex array which has both the image and the label. So you would have to segment, we would have to index it like this to get the image and the label. And then I just display the image using matplotlib, and I print the label. So here you can see that the label is 1 0. This means that the cat is my 0th class and the dog would be my class 1. Then coming to the model, this I made a function called define model to initialize my model. Sequential is just my API, which I'm using to like initialize the layers and build my model. It's just an API like which is needed to build the model. It's not very important. Then so we add like whatever layers we want, we keep adding them one after the other in this manner. So conv2d is a convolutional layer. 32 is the number of filters I have in that layer. 3 cross 3 is the size of one filter. So it's a 3 cross 3 filter in this case. This is and you can specify the activation, the stride, and kernel initializer is just used to initialize the weights in a specific fashion. It is not very important, so it's not very important. It's you can leave it out as well, but it's not very important. Padding is so padding is what I talked about earlier. If I set padding equal to same, that means that I am just padding my image in such a way that the output feature map would have the same dimensions as the input feature map. So that's what we discussed earlier. This is the input shape of my image, 200 cross 200 cross 3. Then I add and so one thing is that strides is by default 1. So I have explicitly specified here for clarity. But even if you don't specify it, it would be 1. It would be taken as 1 by default. Then I have a max pooling layer of size filter size 2 cross 2, followed by more convolutional layers and max pooling layers. At the end, I have a flatten layer. Then I have a hidden layer of 128 neurons with ReLU activation, followed by softmax. This is for the output layer. So I have 2 classes, that's why 2 neurons. I select my optimizer as SGD or stochastic gradient descent, so which is a kind of optimizer, and it has a learning rate of 0.01, and momentum is a parameter which is associated with SGD, which is not very important. Like it's out of the scope of this workshop, and you can before you train your model, you have to compile it with the optimizer and the loss. So I also specify that I want to accuracy is the metric which I want to monitor. Then return. So when I call, so here I have just initialized my model using the function which I have defined. So then model checkpoint is a function which I can use to save my model at any specific epoch. Epochs are one epoch is said to be over when the model has seen all the images in the dataset once. So so in my example, I have chosen 35 epochs here. So that means that my model will see my entire dataset 35 times, and each epoch would be divided into 455 steps. So each this 455, why it was 455? It's because my batch size is 55. So if I take 55 and multiply it with 555, that would end up with 25,000, like nearly 25,000 roughly, because it does some rounding off. So that's why we have 455 steps here. So coming back to model checkpoint, it's just used to store, like save my model's weights at any point I want, and I'm monitoring accuracy over here. So, and I'm saying that save best only equals to true. This means that my it would only save a model when the accuracy improves. So, so for example, when I'm training my model here, my accuracy keeps on increasing with each epoch. So, suppose it would that would mean that it is saving at every epoch. Suppose that it decreases after a certain epoch, then we do not want such a model. So that won't be saved. So that's we use checkpoint for that. So this is so we saw the fit function in linear regression. Fit function was used for, like, we used linear regressor dot fit x train comma y train, right? So here this is something analogous to that, wherein we have a generator. Generator is nothing but my train batches variable, which I specified here, and callbacks is just a checkpoint. I specify the checkpoint thing here. Then validation data, I'm not currently having any test data, so I've put it as null. But we will look at it later what to do if we have testing data as well. And I have set the epochs as 35. So when it of course takes some time to train this. So I already had trained it beforehand and have the output here. So you can see that the loss initially is 0.83, but it keeps on decreasing as the epochs progress, and eventually it is 0.01. So very less compared to the initial value, and simultaneously the accuracy also keeps increasing. So after 35 epochs, the model has gotten quite good with 99% training accuracy. So, but you should not actually be deceived by training accuracy. You should the more accurate representation of the model would be validation accuracy or your testing accuracy. So we will, if you want to, I will show you how to incorporate that as well. So after this, I have just initialized a variable called history to equal to this. Then I can use that history variable to plot graphs using these functions in Matplotlib. So you can see that the accuracy eventually like converges to nearly 100%, and the loss also comes down quite significantly. So if you want to check your testing accuracy as well, you would have to make some modifications. So I request everyone to try this out like later. So what you have to do is take your training data set, take all the images in this. So 25,000 images, right? So you can shift 5,000 images from that manually to another test set and split them equally between cats and dogs. So 2,500 cats and 2,500 dogs. And then you just uncomment this and put that path over here, which will become your test path. Then you would have to uncomment these two lines as well. And then you would have test batches too. Test batches, it's very similar, like very similar to train batches itself, except that we are not doing flipping there because we don't want to do augmentation at the time of testing. We only do it at the time of training. So then everything else is same. Here you just put validation data is equal to test batches. When you do this and run it, you would get another parameter here called validation accuracy. And that will just tell you how your model is performing on images which it has not seen before also. So that is a more accurate representation of your model's capability. So please try that out. Please try to find out the testing accuracy as well to improve your understanding. Then lastly, if I want to suppose I have a model, so I use checkpoint function to save a model, right? If I want to load it back, I use the load model function in this manner, wherein I just put the path to the model, and this would be my this would just loaded CNN would just be my train model from that path. So I guess that's it for the workshop today. So if you have any more questions with the implementation or the theory as well, you can ask me.
Yes, I had a doubt.
Yeah.
So in that part where like you've added the layers like Convo 2D, this
Yeah.
part. So like this 32, 3, 3 means there will be 32 filters and each of dimension 3 into 3. So like,
Yeah.
what will be the value of those 32? Like they will be like assigned randomly, or we too can contribute to that, or they'll just be assigned something. Like what is
Yeah,
the
so
value of those metrics?
that's where the kernel initializer comes into picture. So here they've set it to HE uniform. So so this HE uniform is a type of initializer which will define how they are initialized, how the weights are initialized. So before the model is trained itself. If you don't specify a kernel initializer, it would just assign them randomly. You can either specify it or you can leave it. So initially it would be randomly if you don't specify it. Then it would gradually get trained. Yeah.
Like after, let's say after we have specified this, so like there will be any pattern in those, like in the matrix values, like it will be 1 0 0 0 1 1. So what kind of uniformity will be there, like anything like that? But it's not
So
that important.
in this specific case, I do not know how it will be, but it will follow a pattern if you use a kernel initializer. So there are different forms of kernel initializers which you can choose depending on your application. So means different. So sometimes initializing your model, your weights to a specific in a specific way might give you better accuracy. But you cannot set yourself manually, like if you want it to be 1 0 or however you want it. So you cannot like manually choose like random means you cannot manually do it.
Okay, got it. And one more thing, like finally, like we are doing this max pooling 2D where we are like shrinking it down using this.
Yeah.
We are like reducing it. So let's say it's 4 into 4, then we can easily do it. By 2 into 2, we can divide that. But if it's 5 into 5, something like that, then what happens? Like it leaves out something, or what?
So you're saying like when it does not divide perfectly, right? Like
Yes. When it does not divide perfectly.
So there, what would happen is that it would just leave out the tip of the image. So yeah,
Okay.
it would leave out the tip of the image. But you should take care that the values that you specify is such that too much is not being left out. Otherwise, like the information would be lost, right? Like at the tips. So you have to
According to the
take it.
input shape, we can keep these values. You can see that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So maybe tell me.
Yeah, what is the stride for max pooling layer? Like, can't we specify the stride here?
Stride. Okay. You can. For max pooling, you can also do it. Like, you can have stride here also. Stride equal to whatever you want. Stride. Yeah. You can do this. And one more thing is that if you want your stride to be different along the x and y axis, you can do something like this as well. So in this case, your output feature will not be square shaped. So it would become rectangular. So is that clear?
Yes, it's clear now.
Any more questions?
Where can the input, the training batch size, can it also affect the accuracy of a model?
Training batch size, yeah, it can affect it. Like, so what is happening is if you have more elements in your batch size, like it's updating the parameters considering more examples at once. So there, what would happen is that it's like it becomes more generalized. So if you it's better to keep your batch size slightly more. So how much ever how much your compute power your runtime has or your PC has. So if I, for example, try to keep it as at 25,000, it won't support it. So you have to experiment and see how much you can go before it cannot support it. But it's always preferable to keep it slightly more. Whereas with testing batches, there is no, I mean, it's just used to compute the validation accuracy. So it doesn't make that much of a difference because no training is happening there. Anything else? So I'll be giving the PPT and this notebook. You can just and also the data set as well. So you can just run it and also try to compute, like, check the validation accuracy of your model by making the modifications. Okay, if there are no more questions, then we can close the workshop for today.
Okay, then. Should I end the meeting now? I mean, if everyone is clear with the doubts. Yeah, let's just end it.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.